Hello everyone and welcome to my YouTube channel. Can China kill the US dollar? Is the US dollar as the world reserve currency under threat? Well, let's talk about that for a few minutes. Let's start with China itself. China's a great economy. It has fantastic potential and great strength. We have seen how it has been gaining ground in the global economy for the past 2 decades. However, although China has become a significant part of the world GDP, its currency, the yuan, is barely used in international transaction. It is quite surprising that for a country that has become such a phenomenal superpower with such a large economy, its currency is so poorly utilized. While the US dollar has been strengthening as a world reserve currency, and the Bank of International Settlements shows us that utilization of the US dollar in transactions globally has increased in the past years, the use of the yuan has not increased significantly, and it's almost 4% of all transactions. There's an important factor to understand there. It is impossible to dethrone the dollar if you keep capital controls, legal and investor security that is at least still not at the levels that exist in developed economies, and very, very far away from being an open and separated power type of environment. Therefore, the capital controls are definitely hurting the yuan and are definitely hurting its utilization globally. It is also important to understand that China is not the largest holder of US debt at all. The largest holders of US debt are actually the Americans themselves, the Federal Reserve, US pension funds, different government bodies, institutional investors, etc. China is not even the largest foreign holder of US debt, that is Japan. Even if China decided to get rid of all of its treasury holdings, it would barely make a dent on the US debt and definitely on US yields. Think about this. In the past years, the Federal Reserve has been increasing its money supply, increasing its balance sheet. There have been numerous attempts of massively increasing the monetary policy, and with those, government bond yields remain very low. Second, bid to cover in what is the trading of US bonds remains very solid, way above 2 times. So it would be absorbed very, very quickly. But there is an Achilles heel of the Chinese economy precisely because of the mistake of keeping its capital controls, poor investor security, and weak legal security, which is that the US dollar shortage of the Chinese economy is very high. It is true that China has very strong FX reserves, foreign exchange reserves. However, those very strong reserves, first, have been falling. Second, have been falling at the same time as US dollar denominated debt in the Chinese economy has been rising. So while you maintain capital controls, the risk of capital flight is important, but it is also very important to see that the increase in US dollar denominated liabilities is very strong. A lot of people say that the yuan is gold backed, and that therefore it will be a safe haven for investors that are concerned about the US monetary policy. Well, reality shows us otherwise. In reality, the yuan is as poorly gold-backed as almost any fiat currency. If you look at the FX reserves of China, but if you add gold reserves, you can see, for example, that money supply in China has been growing multiple times more than its gold reserves. Furthermore, another thing that you can see is that its gold reserves account for less than 0.2% of its money supply. As such, the Chinese currency is as gold-backed as so many other fiat currencies, which means that it's not gold-backed at all. In terms of the Chinese economy, Therefore, what the government needs to do is to address those key issues of capital controls, of investor and legal security, and to attract investments into the country and allow the yuan to be used more in international transaction. The Chinese government needs to let go of the decision of having the yuan at a fixed exchange ratio that is constantly intervened by the central bank. You cannot have both. You cannot be a world reserve currency and at the same time a contender to the United States dollar with capital controls, with the yuan being fixed, and with poor legal and investor security, because that is not going to allow you to develop as a reserve currency and develop as a foreign and internationally accepted currency and financial market. It is also very important for China to understand that for them, the foreign exchange reserves and their holdings of US dollars are part of the strength of its economy, and that it continuously needs to export and bring new reserves in order to avoid a massive devaluation of the yuan that would destroy the purchasing power of salaries in China, and that would be extremely negative for the economy. The strengths of the Chinese economy are there, and we cannot deny them. But we cannot expect the Chinese currency to dethrone the US dollar when what keeps the US dollar as the world reserve currency are the levels of investor security, the massive level of financial balance that arrives into the United States because of the defense of private property and the defense of investor security, and also because the Federal Reserve's policy is always aimed at addressing real demand for US dollars. The challenge of the PBOC, of the Central Bank of China, is to, on one side, address its massive shortage of US dollars, improve the transparency and the openness of its currency and financial markets, improve as well legal security and investor security, and finally also allow the yuan to trade openly at a price that is realistic relative to its true demand out there. So there may be contenders for the new world reserve currency, but they're not out there. It is definitely not the euro that on top of all the challenges that so many other currencies and fiat currencies have, they have on top of that redenomination risk and the risk of breakup at some point of the euro area. We all hope it doesn't happen. It is not going to be the yen that is in itself almost a secondary division side of the US dollars, because the reason why the yen remains strong is precisely because of the Japanese corporations and citizens' massive savings in US dollars. There's one thing that keeps the US dollar as the world reserve currency, and it's the reality that when you compare to all other fiat currencies, it continues to provide more legal investor and capital security than other currencies, and that's why it continues to be that way. And the fact that the Federal Reserve, despite undergoing aggressive monetary policies, and the fact that the government is increasing its deficit spending, those two things are not addressing the global shortage of dollars that we explained in a video prior here in this YouTube channel. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. Please leave your comments below. Follow my YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and keep defending freedom. It is always important. Thank you very much.